South Africa's femicide rate is about 5 times higher than the global average, and that's according to several analyses. And it really means that in South Africa, GBV is nothing short of a national crisis. It's a deeply entrenched scourge that continues to claim lives, undermine dignity, and erode social stability. According to the first ever national gender based violence prevalence study by the Human Science and Research Council, approximately 35.5% of women aged 18 and older have experienced physical and/or sexual violence in their lifetime. Now, even more alarmingly, in the past 12 months alone, over 1.5 million women reported suffering either physical and or sexual violence, including about 1.3 million who experienced physical violence. Now, these numbers are absolutely staggering, and one is one too many. And the very fact that intimate partner violence remains pervasive means that something needs to be done about this. Now, in 2019, a national strategic plan on gender-based violence and femicide was drafted, and in September 2020, it was implemented. Now, to speak to us about this particular document and the importance and significance thereof, we are now joined by Commissioner Siham Samai, who's also the chairperson of the South African Women Lawyers Association in the Western Cape. Assalamu alaikum, Siham. Shukran for joining us and welcome.
Assalamu alaikum to the listeners of 786. And thank you again for indulging me. I just ended up, it's a matter that I had to see. Thank you.
No.
Do you want me to put the camera on?
Yes, please.
Okay. It is on my phone though.
Okay, it's absolutely fine, because this is one of those conversations, of course, that we want to upload on our YouTube channel, exactly because it's so incredibly important for us to speak about these matters. And we say thank you to you that in and amongst, of course, we know your very busy schedule to speak to us about this. Now the NSP that we just referred to, we want to speak about how it was developed and I suppose the impacts thereof. But what happened in 2019, around 2019, 2020, that caused this shift in awareness around GBV?
Well, I mean, over the years, let me just explain. I mean, that there has always been many gender-based activists, etc., for many, many years that spoke about the crisis of gender-based violence in the country. But obviously in 2016, we had the total shutdown, and we know that there were, a few murders, femicides during that particular period. And out of the total shutdown came the 24 demands. And from that 24 demands, a civil society with government, because what happened was that the committee or those that were driving this particular process was both civil society and government, and it was held in the presidency. And with that, we went to the national strategic and drafted the national strategic plan. 2019, and then obviously we came back also then in 2022. And so there's a lot of challenges still with in particular around implementation. There has been a few, for example, amendments to the various acts, which were called the 3 GBV acts, etc., that also came out of, the National Strategic Plan process. It's all within this particular plan to be able to say what needs to happen to ensure that we deal with the scourge of GBV and femicide in the country.
Now, people like yourself, and of course, you are commissioner, you are the chairperson of the South African Women Lawyers Association. We realize that you see the impacts thereof when you see women coming into your spaces and coming into your offices, and so you see the lived experience and the impacts of these policies. So yes, we know with these plans on paper, in theory, it's one thing, but of course, for professionals like yourselves, and legal practitioners like yourselves, you want to hasten the impacts thereof on the lived experiences of these
Yes,
women. Now, it's really with that in mind also that the plan is structured around particular pillars. Apparently, there's six. Explain to us
yes.
what e-pillar is about and exactly why it is so important when we speak about how it's going to impact on the lived experiences of women.
Yes. Well, I mean, let me just say, I mean, they are the six pillars. I'm not going to go in terms of the numbers. I should know it by now, but it's got to do with prevention. It's got to do with, for example, pillar three. It's got to do with the broad enforcement within the criminal justice system. There is also, for example, the economic empowerment, which for me is very, very important. And I'm going to, and then also issues of prevention. And then also we need to be able to see how the different departments all come together, which is the issue of governance and coordination, etc. Who holds all of this? So that is still a challenge there. Okay. But I'm not going to speak about the governance and coordination, etc.,
Mm,
but more the other pillars.
okay.
And because it all intersect with one another. The issue, for example, like I said, in the pillar that deals with the court systems, that deals with the enforcement, that deals with the various acts, which is from the Domestic Violence Act, Protection of Harassment, the sexual offences, all of those different pieces of acts, and deal with the implementation thereof, whether or not it's through domestic violence courts or sexual offences courts, etc. What we also need to look at is the empowerment part, because many women don't leave their abusers because of the economic dependency, whether or not it's maintenance, whether or not it's because the particular person is the only breadwinner. And also, the woman normally carries most of the unpaid care work.
Mm,
Don't think that they are not working. They are working. They're looking after the elderly, they're looking after the children, they ensure that there's food on the table, etc. If you really look at that, that is what we call care, the burdens that is placed on women that is not even costed. Because in the normal course, can you see that it's much more bigger? So even a woman, and I'm not just focusing on the the acts. I want you to look at the live reality of a survivor or victim of gender-based violence, living in a home, having to navigate, having children that has to go to school, dependent on the husband for the particular maintenance, has to come to court. The issue that you need to ask is that if the court is not in that particular area, how are they going to get there in terms of funding? Who's going to look after the children? So it is, I always say that just for the woman in terms of GBV to navigate and to get to the court system is in itself
mm,
a challenge of economics, a challenge of care, a challenge of fear, a challenge of not being heard, and also obviously the victimization. Because if it's a family member, it's going to be problematic. So I'm placing this here because I want people to place themselves in the footsteps of a victim. Sometimes we don't know. We come to the court, and what do we see here? For example, if you have a court system, not all the courts, but certain courts where you have the male and the female sitting in one space, or you have the prosecutor just calling out people's names in corridors. And that is what I call secondary victimization, because there
mm,
is no privacy, there is no confidentiality. And I'm placing this here because I want people to see it's not easy. And you lose an entire day's salary
mm,
just by sitting here, and then the matter gets postponed again.
mm,
So this, and then you have to go back into the home of where the abuse is, which is why it's so important that we need in our communities safe spaces, spaces where women can go. We need shelters, and it should not be an issue of stigma. We need more shelters. We need more safe spaces where women can go to be able to ensure that she gets out of this particular relationship, but she's also not worse off. And how do we ensure that it's not worse off? It's with economic empowerment. It's ensuring that women obtain housing. It's to be able to ensure that the children get maintenance, the school fees are being paid, whatever that might be, so that they don't go back. And I know that, yeah, I've not even sketched if you do go back, because many years ago when I practiced at the University of the Western Cape, when I was an attorney director there, we served, for example, a summons on the the husband, and the next day it was in the newspapers, killed. And so it's those things that people don't understand what misogyny means, what and how does it manifest itself. When I speak broadly patriarchy, when I speak broadly, what does all of that mean? It is for exactly that, that women are seeing, for example, within a very particular context, and when they step out of that, there is, for example, the punitive type of um, cost. Or it will either be that you're hit or you're abused, or look, in this particular sense, the person is killed, shot. And this is the daily reality of women in South Africa. And we need to deal with uh, you know, attitudes. We need to deal with how and what the clergy and the mosques and the churches all say about the roles of men and women, and what it should be, because it all feeds into gender-based violence. If it is, if, for example, it's not adhered to, and in particularly women. But I also want to say that our laws are some of the best. And if it works properly, a woman will be able to go to court, get an interdict, but in that interdict, she can also speak to economic abuse and also psychological abuse, because the first thing that the husbands do is to be able to cut off that economic stream, whether or not it's medical aid, whether or not it's the children's fees, whether or not it's any form of nafaka. And because they are still married, you can actually go to court also and to claim your nafaka. Now, many people don't know that. Our courts have recognized the enforcement of maintenance nafaka many, many, many years ago. And people need to be able to know if they are still within that marriage setting, it can be done. And I'm not talking about maintenance for the children. I'm talking about maintenance for the wife. I'm speaking about this because maintenance is a major, major challenge. And it is a form of economic abuse. Because if you don't pay, they are suffering, and it's done to be able to assert power and also to ensure that the woman or the children, whoever they are abusing, are within, don't step outside of whatever boundaries they have set. So, what I want to speak about in terms of maintenance is that many women, many women believe that, they won't be able to get, but you can. You can get spousal maintenance, and you can get maintenance for the children. I think it's important for me because the economic part forces many, many women to go back. Also, many of the homes are not in their houses. Also, Islamic marriages, because many say, for example, it's out of community property. And so, even though there has been contributions toward the property, and also now, but the one thing is because of the court case, that you can go to the divorce court to be able to get a divorce and to ensure that's equitable redress, not just, because the property is in his name. I'm placing this here because economic abuse, psychological abuse, mental abuse is some of the key, uh, uh, um, not just key forms of of um, abuse, and people don't recognize those. They just see the physical ones, they just see the verbal ones, which is the swearing, which is the hitting, etc., the cursing, whatever it might be. But they don't see the economic, psychological, and mental abuse. And so that is why it's also very important that even when you go through these family violence court or the domestic violence courts, it's very important to ensure that you get psychological and mental support, because going through these processes, there will be anxiety, there will be challenges. And so to be able to ensure that you are the trauma that they have gone through. And so I've always encouraged people to go to, your family type of, if you can't afford, there are institutions that provided, for example, for low cost or pro bono, or you can go just to Department of Social Development and see whether or not there's social workers or psychologists to be able to support um, you and to be able to deal with that particular traumas.
Mm.
And so these are all things that the NSP look at, not just through the lens of the court system, not just through the lens of punitive and to be able to ensure that people just come back like it's a sausage machine. No, it's to be able to ensure that the woman is supported, that there's a shelter, that they have psychological support, that the children go to school. And that is what our law wanted. That is what the policies say. And that is what the NSP requires of them. But it requires a lot. You need training, you need specialist type of prosecutors, etc., etc., maintenance officers, domestic violence clerks, which are all within the court system. The issue is about monitoring, the issue is about evaluation, and the issue is about ensuring that there is implementation.
Mm.
I know I've spoken a lot. I don't know whether or not you have any questions, but there are domestic violence courts, for example, at all the courts in the country.
Yeah.
And so you'll be able to access, yes.
No, I think the one thing that we've established by now is that this probably needs to be an ongoing conversation between ourselves and yourself, if you can indulge us, because there's so much that we need to understand, and not just anecdotal evidence, but also, of course, also as you say, that it's so important that. Firstly, when you mention the fact that and you say this as a legal practitioner yourself, that some of the laws that we have on paper are the best, and also you imply that that civil society, the private sector, local organizations, individuals, and then of course legal practitioners like yourself played quite a strategic role in as far as developing the NSP is concerned. But we realize that when it comes to implementation, that's often where the problem lies, and this is why it's so important for us to speak to people like yourselves and teams like yourselves that we know are rooted within community spaces that see the lived experience of women. So you make reference to the practicalities. For example, who do the children stay with, and how does somebody who's been a victim of gender-based violence, how does she get herself to the court, and then needing to go back to a house where the perpetrator lives, and then knowing, the sort of circumstances that many of our women live in. We know that the majority of women, yes, they live under circumstances where they are economically disempowered. And so these are realities. And then so we ask ourselves, when in the context of you saying that some of the laws are amongst the best, but is it at what point is the gap? Is it the fact that it's not that there's not sufficient budget for it? Is it when it filters down to provincial, to local levels? Speak to us about some of these gaps in terms of implementation.
I do think, yes, we need more budgets always. We always need more budgets to be able to ensure that there's obviously more, in terms of implementation. But let me explain that I do think on the highest level that there should be proper coordination. We have all these laws. For example, if you look at Domestic Violence Act, and if you look at, all of these GBV acts, like the sexual offences, etc., there's a very, in the sexual offence, in the act, it speaks to an intersectorial committee of of different departments, justice, TSD, etc., etc. So the purpose of this is to be able to look at the statistics, to look at how you can develop, for example, whether or not it's more efficient domestic violence court, to be able to see what those challenges are, to speak to civil society groupings, and to be able to, like, uh, coordinate. And because everybody doesn't have all the funding, but if you do your particular part and there is proper coordination, I do think that the resources and what has been put in place can go much, much, much further. I mean, when obviously in my previous, when I worked also for Department of Justice, and when I worked previously at other institutions, there was various projects that we also took on to be able to work away, for example, backlogs and etc. etc. And so that type of coordination must not just continue, it must be reinstituted. Whether, because, like I said, you got your gender justice forums, child justice forums, you got the LGBTIQ forum, you got victim support, and you see all the forums that you have. So my issue is what are they doing? There is it that you need to speak about budgets. There is it that you're supposed to speak about statistics, and to be able to ensure that there is change within the criminal justice system around these GBV matters. And the important thing also, we need, for example, like I said, one of the pillars is the council. Major challenges around possibly the setup or how it's going to be, whether or not it has any with on enforcement, etc., etc. So the NSP, like I said, it's a transformative document. It was done by civil society, gender activists, government departments, everyone, and it's something that we need to be able to work towards. But we need to be able to put, like I said, your money where your mouth is, or where the paper is. In addition to that, now that we're also going, for example, into, local government elections, etc., most important is that communities need to be able to ask, what is that particular parties, etc., or even person that they are going to vote for, etc., doing in relation to GBV? Ask the questions around the budgets. What have you put? What are you going to put in? Because let me give you another example on the Cape Flats. In our townships, if we don't have infrastructure development, we don't have the lights, we have toilets where people have to walk, we have, for example, can you see that? And you have to go and either, go to the toilet, urinate, whatever it might be. And don't even think, when you, for example, the elderly, and so there is no infrastructure, there's no lightning to be able to go to these, just to have ablution, etc., etc. And that is where most of the violence happen. And so you can see why local government is also so important, to be able to do infrastructural development, to be able to build economic support, in communities, in particular women, and to be able to see how is it that the community can develop, and to be able to make it safe. Because there are no places. Where do our children play? And then obviously the scourge of drugs and alcohol, which has a devastating effect. And so Why I'm talking about this is because it all impacts and it's all drivers of GBV.
Yeah.
And it's why it's important. We've got phenomenal policies. We've got a national policy on drugs, how to deal with that, which is held by SAPS. These NGOs that deals with people that live and take drugs to be able to ensure they come off, and all of these things. Because, like I said, it's not just going to the court; it's to be able to understand what those drivers are, the root causes, and to be able to rip it out. And because by the time people get into the court system, it has it's it is a challenge.
Mm.
And so we need to work on prevention programs. So where does that prevention program sit? Art, sport,
Mm.
all of those things need to come in our communities. And I know that you wanted to just, as you can see, to drive GBV and femicide away, we need to be able to rebuild our communities.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, it is fundamental, and government needs to invest in relation to that.
And we do realize, of course, that these need to be ongoing conversations. And so our time has unfortunately run out, Siham. We really just touched on one or two, aspects also of the NSP. But we say thank you so much for joining us today and hoping that we can continue these segments. So yes, it's so important for our community and for us also, as community members, as part of civil society, to be informed about what's happening and to not become despondent about the world and about our community and about these statistics, but understand that we all have our roles to play in as far as change is a concern, and of course, change for the better. Shukran so much.
Shukran, Afwan, for having me.
Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum.